A massive shout out to the Jonin tier member Mr. Leroy 1998 and Jenin tier Leah Rov. Your support means a lot. If you would like your name mentioned in every video, support the channel, as well as receive special perks and soon having early access to new series, consider becoming a member of this channel by hitting that join button. Hi guys, this is the next part of What If Natsu Was the Son of Acnologia? I hope you enjoy. Natsu, while liking his odds in the current fight, did not like the odds of people around him. The Dragon Prince spared a glance around as he flipped over Kalida's attempt to behead him with her wings that proved sharp enough to cut down trees with one swipe. 5 dragons out of 13 that came through the gate have left the immediate proximity of their location and choose to decimate the rest of the city. He could see Master Makarov brawling in his titan form with Stone Dragon, and he had to hide a wince as the dragon headbutted the old man. There was not enough dragons or dragon slayers to fight all the dragons that came through. Not that he actually believed any of the slayers could kill a dragon. Sting and Rogue could claim all they want, but he refused to believe it. I don't think you wish to fight her, it cooed so softly in his ear. Natsu almost missed it. Natsu's hand, warped in chaos energy, froze, and he watched in silent horror as the magic diminished before he could even touch the dragoness he was fighting. The Dragon Prince jumped out of the way of a roar that would surely melt his flesh right off of his bones, but he was a moment too late to save his coat and could only sigh in annoyance as he saw the hole forming and the acid eating away the fabric. With gritted teeth, he took off his coat and threw it in Kalida's face, making the dragon sputter at the sudden fabric covering her eyes. Tricks won't help you win this, son of Acnologia. Kalida growled dangerously as she tore the coat away from her face. The thin dragon stopped, her mouth clamping shut even as acid dripped from down her jaws. Natsu was nowhere to be seen, and the dragon looked around, her gut telling her it was not good. So now I'm the son of Acnologia. Not a hybrid. Natsu's voice morphed as he came crashing down on Kalida's back, bones protruding from his back as flesh slowly warped around them and wings formed. The Dragon Prince raised his newly formed tail, and even before the muscles were covered by flesh he stabbed the tip into the joint of her left wing. Kalida howled in pain, blood exploding as the tail was soon followed by a clawed hand. The dragoness raised on her hind legs and threw herself on her back in hopes of squashing her opponent under her weight. Natsu, almost completely transformed in his demon form, jumped away and spread the long wings rising into the sky, mouth already opening for another attack, while the dragon lied on her back, roaring and screaming as her half-torn wing flapped uselessly. Chaos dragons. No! Roar! Natsu cried in frustration as the attack missed, his moment of deconcentration leaving Kalida enough time to move out of the way, and the attack hit the stone bellow, sending dust and rocks flying. Get out of my head, Cheney! Natsu growled, his patience long since lost. You will obey me. The king will have you, son of Acnologia. Kalida growled as she exited the risen dust, jumping at him with her mouth wide open and ready to tear him apart. Natsu, in attempt to send the dragon back on Earth once again, tried to cave her face in Chaos Dragon's iron fist. It was a relief he didn't miss this time, for he would surely lose more than just a bit of blood when Kalida's maw closed around his arm. The Dragon Prince hissed in pain as acid bit into the wound, and by the time the hissing of the acid stopped, his arm looked a horrible mess he did not predict. He dropped to the ground and with his other arm took a handful of his sleeveless shirt and tore it apart, the task all too easy thanks to the claws, and hastily warped it around disfigured limb while avoiding Kalida's roar. By the time I finish fighting with her I'll be naked, Natsu mused in annoyance as he ran at Kalida, but instead of attacking as she expected, he jumped over her and spread his wings once again to hold himself above her before warping them around him, resembling a cocoon more than a demon. Chaos Dragon's Sword Horn. The attack was far more deadly with horns on your head, something Natsu learned a long time ago as he crashed into Kalida one last time. The dragon did not howl or cry. It did not roar as Natsu destroyed her spine and lungs, turning her chest into mush. Kalida dropped to the cold stone, dead, only the nerves in her body twitching her jaw and tail. Natsu rose from the corpse, cursing his position as his horn got stuck in her ribcage. The Dragon Prince tugged at the ribs before giving up and crushing the bone with his fist before pulling out his head. He stepped out of the caved back and looked at the mess he created with an empty face and hollow eyes. Kalida's dead eyes were open, staring in frozen horror, and her green scales lost their shine, coated in fresh blood. Natsu was well aware he looked quite similar. Probably even worse considering he was alive and covered from head to toe with blood. His hair came loose from its ponytail in dirt and blood, both his and Kalida's, matted it against his skin, over his face and back, so with an annoyed sigh he pushed the strands back and out of his face. He was done with Khalida just in time to see the purple dragon and what he recognized soon as an alive version of Zirconis pouncing on his father. Acnologia was doing well considering both dragons were relatively strong. Natsu was not worried in the slightest about his father. Acnologia will defeat the two. If more joined it might become a problem, but he will leave it to his father for now. Natsu was more worried about his guild. Red eyes rolled back to the stone dragon and his master, and to his dismay his master was not visible anymore, which meant he was no longer in his titan form. Hopefully not, because he was dead. The dragon prince rolled his shoulders and took a running start, void opening in front of him without him even uttering the name of the spell, and he passed through. The void opened above stone dragon's head just as he started powering the roar, and his guild cheered at the sight of him crashing into another, Chaos Dragon's sword horn, into stone dragon's head. The dragon's head crashed into the rocky path below, going good few inches deep into the cement and the rock that where his scales flew scattered, blood flowing down the side of dragon's face as Natsu rose from his spot on the top of the head. The dragon rose its humongous head from the ground and roared in fury. "Who in fucking Ozil are you?" The deep voice of the dragon vibrated from his throat as his eyes turned upwards in vain attempt to see the offending dragon in demon's body. Natsu scowled, somewhat disappointed. The dragon wasn't dead but not surprised. He couldn't expect to kill him as easily as he did Khalida. Khalida's whole body was the size of this dragon's head, so it was only logical his rocky scales would be far too thick to kill him with one just hit. "Natsu Souleater," Natsu replied evenly as he drove his clawed fist into the small patch of visible flesh where the scales were demolished. The dragon howled and shook his head violently, managing to get Natsu off of his head when the dragon prince lost his grip. Natsu backflipped and spread his wings just before he hit the ground, soaring into the air once more just moments before Rocky Paw crashed into his landing spot. "Little runt," the dragon hollered in fury, and a spike flew at Natsu from the ground, leaving a small gash on his shoulder. The dragon turned around, his tail lashing behind him, almost crushing half of Natsu's guild if it wasn't for Laxus, who batted it away with thunderstrike he called from the very sky. "Need any help?" Laxus yelled with a grin. Natsu leveled him with an annoyed look before he looked at his guild, spotting the old master, thankfully alive but quite bettered. The dragon behind him roared again, obviously offended he was ignored, and he snapped his teeth at the demon, Natsu moving away from the jaws that could swallow him whole with the quick usage of the void. "You should stop fighting." Natsu exited through the void and stumbled next to Laxus, earning a concerned look in return. "No, not with him. Make sure the rest of the guild scatters. I don't have time to make sure they don't get crushed in the crossfire." "Hey, we're not leaving you," Droy made it known. "Yes, you." Natsu ground his teeth as Dragon's Paw came down at him. "Just because you're tiny doesn't mean you can hide, little one." The dragon growled at him as Natsu dodged. "I'm not hiding, you stupid oaf." Natsu roared at him and Laxus jumped back as Natsu released a roar. The dragon growled and spread his wings, rising into the air to avoid the attack. "Get them out of here. Get them out or I'll make them leave." Laxus nodded, a sense of foreboding gnawing at his stomach while he screamed at his guild. Not many were here. Jalal and Smith's siblings were off fighting somewhere else, and Wendy left to help Mermaid heal when Blue Dragon descended on them. The group that left with Altair was not seen since that morning, and Lucy went running towards the gates a good half an hour ago. Laxus looked up to see his friend and mentor battle with the dragon in the smoke-filled sky. A scream broke his thoughts, and before he could see where it came from, metal orb crashed beside him. Natsu flew under the wing of the dragon he learned was called Wiston and countered the wing attack with one of his own, his wings glowing with energy before he released it, hitting Wiston into light sand-colored scales of his underbelly. He moved swiftly for another hit but was stopped as Motherglare's roar slammed into him, sending him on an unwelcome flight. "Since you didn't want to come to me, I came to you," Future Robe called out with a smug smirk from his spot on Motherglare's head. "Not a smart choice," Natsu informed the sick man. "Oh, I know, I won't be here for long." Natsu's eyes looked at the sky. The smoke continued getting thicker thanks to Atlas Flame burning the city to the ground. "Where is Wiston?" "Don't worry about him, he won't attack while we talk." Natsu's eyes narrowed as he glared at Future Rogue. "Get out of my head. I think we can both conclude that's not going to happen. As for why I'm here." Rogue's eyes moved to his right and a white shape burst from the smoke, the dragon easily larger than Acnologia coming through with a chilling roar. Did you know that I can control the dragons? I figured as much, Natsu replied dryly. Well, wonderful, I do, unfortunately, need time as you have probably realized by now. The stronger the dragon the longer it takes. I made a mistake in letting you roam free for so long. I didn't believe you would resist for so long. Rogue grinned widely, gesturing towards Whiston behind them and to the white giant on their right. It took me only 2 days to control the mind of poor Whiston. But this old guy. Natsu looked again at the eerie familiar dragon. He knew he hadn't seen it before. He would have remembered him. But that aura. It took me over 7 years and he still sometimes fights it. I even had to remove his thoughts and lock them up. Do you know how annoying it is? And the bastard's the only reason I don't have Acnologia at my side. Controlling him is quite taxing. Natsu looked at the red glazed eyes of the old giant, dread creeping at him. Do you want to guess who that is? No, shame. But I guess it's alright to be speechless. You are facing Lord Havoc after all. Or should you call him grandfather? Motherglare released a roar at him and Natsu knew Rogue was done talking. Dazed from the sudden revelation, he barely dodged Motherglare's roar only to be hit by the sandstorm that exited Whiston's mouth. Natsu let a pained howl as the sand cut into his exposed skin and shredded his pants, mixing with blood and irritating the wounds. If rubbing salt into the wound hurt, this was absolute torture. He crashed against the roof of one building and easily went through it, landing in someone's bathroom and demolishing their toilet. The ground shook and Natsu raised his head with a pained moan. His broken arm looked truly horrifying and he knew if he didn't get to Wendy soon he will lose it. In his fall he managed to broke his wing, but it was small comfort, it was broken only in this form. It still hurt like hell. He didn't have time to lick his wounds because the house shook and a moment later the roof and walls around him disappeared, courtesy of Chaos Dragon's roar, of the original one. Havoc stayed quiet as he looked down at the broken demon who tried to regain his bearings and stand straight. Not so high and mighty anymore, demon. Whiston cackled as he flew above Havoc. Natsu responded with a bloody grin that looked quite crazed. I am not a demon. Havoc gave a roar and his head snapped towards the dragon prince with speed that shouldn't be possible for one of that size. Natsu dodged, albeit barely and only thanks to the chaotic void. He reappeared on the roof of the nearby house, glowing in chaos energy that wrapped around him. Whiston looked at the slowly growing shape in worry, eyes darting to the frozen Havoc whose glazed eyes sharpened for a moment. Should we attack? The stone dragon asked carefully. Havoc stayed quiet as he opened his jaws and gathered the purple energy orb above the open mouth. The house Natsu stood on collapsed under the new weight with a loud boom and Natsu's roar shocked the city. The black and red mini version of Acnologia was half the size of Havoc, but Natsu was glad to note his wings were not broken as he rose into the air with a powerful beat. A roar that was aimed at his head missing by an inch before he charged and released his own, sending Whiston crashing into streets below. Havoc launched at him and snapped with his teeth. The sharp fangs stopped a meter in front of Natsu as the young dragon ducked under Havoc's head and slammed the back of his neck into Havoc's front. AC. Havoc's baritone was barely audible before his voice died down. Natsu pushed him off and looked into the eyes of his grandfather. Sharp for only a moment. You are quite troublesome, Natsu. Awakening Havoc like that, I will admit, I made a great mistake by letting you go for so long. Suck it up, I'm not letting you do as you please anymore. Oh, and what will you do? You seem to have your hands full. It was the truth, as much as Natsu didn't like it. With a growl of anger and pain that Havoc's front paw brought by ripping scales from his face, Natsu released a roar that managed to hit the ancient dragon. Acnologia. Havoc finally roared out and his eyes sharpened. Rogue cursed venomously and screamed in his mind to stop the fool. Whiston charged in, appearing out of nowhere and slamming into Havoc, who let out a furious roar. You fallen idiot, Havoc bellowed as he released himself from Whiston's hold and blasted the dragon away. The stone dragon was left lying after that hit, dead or unconscious. Natsu couldn't tell, and he did not have long to wander as the crazed dragon of chaos slammed into him. As if the situation couldn't get any more confusing, Havoc's next attack was stopped by none other than Acnologia, black scales glinting with blood and blue eyes as cold as ice. Stay away from my son, master. Natsu swallowed thickly before he spoke. He's controlled, father. That wizard that's riding Motherglare's controlling all of them. Acnologia growled dangerously but didn't move from his spot in front of Natsu. I figured as much, brat. You're late with information again. Natsu shook his head quickly as the two watched the Ancient One growl and twitch in the air. Stop struggling, you old bastard. Natsu blinked. That was the first time he heard Rogue's thoughts, and they were obviously not directed at him. Cheney's losing control over Havoc. And how do you know that? Natsu froze and spared a glance at Acnologia before he looked back at Havoc, who flew in front of them. It's obvious, Natsu answered, but he knew he waited too long. He was the obvious one. Rogue laughed and Havoc stilled before the dragon released a roar as big as Acnologia. Acnologia dived, Natsu not far behind him, and the Dragon King slammed into his master's abdomen while Natsu flew overhead, landing on his back and biting at the wing joint. It was a cheap trick, a dragon equivalent of kicking in the balls, but it was just as effective if not more. Copper taste filled Natsu's mouth and Havoc spun in the air trying to get rid of him while clawing at Acnologia. The three plummeted towards the ground. Natsu at the bottom and the youngest dragon had little choice but to stay where he was and endure as the dragon twice his size landed on him. Snap out of it, master. Acnologia barked at him as Havoc jumped to his feet and lunged at Acnologia's throat while Natsu scrambled to his feet. Havoc stayed silent and the sharp end of his tail speared at Acnologia, who cursed and jumped back before rising to the skies. Natsu spread his wings just as Havoc moved to follow and landed on Havoc's back, keeping him landed while preparing to release a roar. Don't kill him, Acnologia bellowed at him from above. Don't fight to kill, his death is the turning point in time. He mustn't die here. Natsu, unable to swallow the building roar, released it into Havoc's tail that moved towards his head, sending a good number of scales and even a bit of flesh flying. Havoc howled and Natsu jumped up when purple energy seared around Havoc's body like fire. You said Cheney was losing his grip, brat. Acnologia called to him. Natsu circled above him and let his magic gather in his wings, noticing Acnologia was doing the same. He still is, he just managed to get a better grip. He's in your head as well, isn't he? Acnologia's question was not as much of a question as it was a statement while he looked at his son, and if Natsu didn't know better he would say his father was worried. What do you mean Havoc's death? How did he die? Smooth, Natsu, really smooth, the Dragon Prince thought to himself sarcastically. So not obvious you're changing the subject. Havoc roared at them in fury and rose in the air, releasing a wing attack and flying right through it, using Dragon's equivalent of sword horn on Natsu. Natsu moved to the side and released his wing attack, Acnologia quickly doing the same, and it crashed into the mighty dragon, smoke and dust rising after the explosion, leaving him virtually blind to Duo's eyes. Did we hit him? Natsu asked after a moment of relative silence passed. Acnologia scoffed. Of course we hit him. Did we hurt him? Well, I wouldn't bet in that. Natsu scowled, but his expression soon changed into one of shock and surprise. He didn't bother to hide when the air shivered around them and the two watched multiple holes, voids open around them. Oh, in fucking Ozel. Drop. Acnologia commanded, and Natsu knew what it meant. He fought with Acnologia now times to know drop and duck were not the same. And with that knowledge, Natsu opened the void beneath him, cursing his slowness as the sky above him exploded in purple light and the unexplainable cold that burned rushed over his back and into his void before the hole closed and he escaped the attack. He thanked the gods for his father, because if it wasn't for him he would probably be dead from that attack. The smell of copper distinctively hit his nose as he pulled out of the void to see his father fighting very much with intent to kill as the king bit at the neck of his former master. Natsu was not all that close, but even from this distance, he could see Acnologia didn't escape that attack unscarred either. At least, Natsu dared to think, Havoc's white scales were not so white anymore. If they wanted to defeat Havoc without killing him, the only way of doing so would be setting him free of Cheney's control. Easier said than done, apparently. You got that right. Now, if you would be so kind and hit your father with a roar. Natsu growled and once again found his body waver and his maw opening. I will not do as you wish. Never. Not now, not ever. Keep telling that to yourself. Natsu gave a roar to announce his frustration and launched at the two dragons in the sky. If he finished this quickly he would be able to find Motherglare and shoot the dragon down along with its rider. An explosion rocked Crocus below him and he looked down, knowing it did not come from the fight above. What he saw made him freeze. Mira was surprised, to say the least, at the sight of two Altiers. Shocked even, and her surprise only grew when she heard the explanation from future Altier that seemed content with being called Oracle, as weird as that was. She didn't have much time to voice her surprise because she was locked in the combat against metal dragon-like creatures barely larger than herself but far deadlier than one might conclude by the looks alone. She screamed as she slammed the shin of her hellhound shape into wingless dragon's head, and the only thing that did was make the little bastard screech louder. Altair and Oracle carried their fights somewhat better thanks to the fact they could actually age the little things, since it would appear they were not fully biological creatures. Even then it was a slow process, and the moment they took down one, two more appeared. Mira spat real molten lava at one monster and found some satisfaction in watching it squirm and howl even as her own throat burned. So, Mira slammed her elbow into creature's head before blowing it away with lava blast from her outstretched hand. "I've been meaning to ask you, why, Oracle?" Oracle's back slammed against Mira's as the girls looked at their growing number of opponents. "I can see glimpses of the future. It saved the opposition more than once, and dragons were aware of that." Oracle jumped and kicked the advancing beast with her heel before using it like a springboard and jumping to another, depressing the floor beneath the beast before reforming it, trapping the creature back deep in stone and caving its skull in. "So I was number 2 on their shit list." "Number 2? Altair asked from her spot where she reduced another creature to ashes. "And who was number 1? Oracle gave a feral grin while she grabbed a piece of broken debris and threw it at one wingless excuse of a dragon, the small stone transforming into a stone spear mid-flight and going straight through beast's heart. "You'll have to teach me how you did that, maybe later." "And number 1 was Natsu. He killed more dragons than all slayers combined." Altair grinned despite their situation. "Dragneel or Soul Eater, both are as awesome as they come." Altair gave a battle cry and swung her knee into little dragon's stomach, making it squeal before Altair's orb crashed across its head. Altair brought her left hand up and grabbed upper part of creature's mouth, channeling her magic inside and obliterating the bastard to oblivion. She cried in triumph as the monster fell, but she missed Mira's cry to watch out. She did not hear it until it was too late and Mira jumped forward, knocking Altair to the side, and warm blood splashed Altair's horrified face. Mira. Wendy was not having fun. Her face was screwed into an ugly scowl as she screamed a battle cry, running her fist into Blue Dragon's snout. The Water Dragon General Levia only laughed at her as he batted the young Dragon Slayer away and tried to stomp down on Urza and Kagura that fruitlessly tried to slash through his scales. Needless to say, they have barely left the mark on the dragon. "Do you truly believe you can defeat me?" the dragon asked as he bared his teeth. "I am one of the strongest water dragons that ever lived. I am second only to Queen Kindra." Wendy narrowed her eyes. Oh, how she wished Natsu was here. She knew that she will die in this fight if things stayed the same. She had no hope of defeating Levia. Not even with 10 other mages tried to hack through his scales. The Dragon General was too good and too strong. A roar ripped the sky one more time and Wendy's concentration broke, the girl looking away from her opponent to see a dragon closing in on them. She shouldn't have taken her eyes off of Levia, for the next moment his claw protruded from her small chest, ripped through her ribcage and tearing her lungs and heart. Levia pulled his claw down and out and Wendy slumped to the ground, her corpse a bloody mess, her face frozen in terror and the scream that never left her lips. Jalal was not having fun. Whoever this dragon was, she was giving him a big headache. Metal Dragoness released a weird screech that sounded more like someone dragged metal against metal, and a roar bursted from her gaping jaws. Jalal dodged using Meteor and was glad to note Arthur sank into shadows and Annie jumped away, although barely. Gajil, who appeared a few minutes ago, swallowed the roar when it reached him and returned it right back. The 4 fairy tale mages fought the dragon alone despite Pegasus's wizards running around. They had their hands full either way with the weird metal dragons without wings that fell from the sky, as ridiculous as that sounded. Jalal had to admit that the 4 of them were actually doing a decent job in pushing the dragon back, but Jalal knew it was only a matter of time before they tired and the dragoness killed them. Gajil landed a hit, driving his leg-turned metal spike into Dragon's neck. Dragon staggered back, blood dripping from the small wound, and she laughed. "You amuse me, mortal." Her voice had a metallic undertone and it sounded just right for someone that tried to kill you. "Cold and alien. Because you wounded me, I will tell you my name and you will tell me yours and of your master." Gajil cocked an eyebrow at her. "My master?" Dragoness nodded her round head. "Your teacher if you want. The stupidity of mortals never ceases to amaze me. Now listen. My name is Blade, and remember it well, for it is the name of the one who will kill you." Before Gajil could respond in kind, 3 dragons shot through the sky, 2 of which he was very familiar with. Natsu and Acnologia roared and slashed at their opponent, who responded with just as much power as the two. At one point the smoke became too dense and the three disappeared from view. The smoke was cleared by a purple flash before explosion obliterated the street. Fairy Tail was fighting on and all that was left was rubble and blood that flowed like a river. No scream was heard, but over 20 lives were extinguished in barely a second and bodies blasted to oblivion. Laxus could only helplessly watch as his guild got massacred by small metal creatures that threatened to overrun them. If only he had thought of it a little sooner. It could have been avoided. Tears stained his face as he screamed in fury and anguish. This was his family, but the blood wouldn't stop flowing and the Dragon Slayer was left alone, screaming as dozen little monsters ripped him apart. Natsu was livid. Everywhere he looked all he could see was death. Even as he tried to catch the scent of his children, even as he tried to catch Myra's magic signature, even as he tried to catch a glimpse of Laxus lightning or Wendy's wind. Nothing was left but the blood that flowed through the streets like a river, smoke that swirled through the sky and scent of burning flesh. All was lost. Natsu snapped and Rogue, sitting on top of Motherglare's head, laughed. Your never is of short lifespan. Natsu released a strangled cry and shot a roar at his father, and if he had been able to see through his eyes he would have caught sight of tears in those cold blue orbs that were not so cold anymore. Altair was on verge of a panic attack if she wasn't having it already. Mira pushed her out of the way. Mira saved her, and now the white-haired woman lied bleeding on the street. One wingless creature has shot her straight through her head. The side of her head was demolished and only one sapphire eye stared blankly ahead, full lips parted in a silent scream. There was nothing beautiful in her death. Not a trace. Altair could only watch the little demons coming closer as she sank to her knees. Oracle begged her to stand up, tried to pull her up, but to no avail. This was the end for Altair. The end of the road. Oracle screamed in frustration and threw her hands to the ground, not actually expecting the ground to collapse and for her and her counterpart to fall through. The landing was rough, but the sand beneath eased it somewhat and the two women sat up with a groan. Altair sniffed and rubbed her eyes. Where are we? Oracle moved her eyes away from the wingless dragons that gathered around the edge of the hole their fall created. The edge that was 50 feet in the air. I don't know, Oracle admitted. Somewhere under Crocus. Altair stood up and hissed, holding her arm close to her chest. The arm was broken in at least one place, but the pain was dulled by her raging emotions. The physical pain was bearable compared to everything else. If only there was something she could do. If only she could fix this. She would give everything. She needed this to end well. If things stayed this way she couldn't go on with her life even if she survived by some miracle. She couldn't accept this. She wouldn't. Altair gritted her teeth and bit back a scream. Anguish, fury, overwhelming sadness that made every inch of her very being scream and cry in pain. Unbearably sickening, and so dark. So lost. But there is a way. If everything was fixed it would be alright. It would be alright if she didn't live to see it. She won't keep on living either way. At least she might get a chance to see her family happy. And one day maybe see them again. At least some of them. I need to fix this, Altair said finally, glaring at her hands, not noticing troubled look that crossed Oracle's face. The older woman knew what her counterpart though. She was the same person despite different paths their lives took. She didn't need to see it to know what will happen. What would happen if she wasn't here? She had learned a long time ago the future she saw was not set. And this was one of the times she will do everything she can to stop the future from playing out. Future had many courses. Only one is going to happen. Only one, but the possibilities are endless. It was a good thing she could see all of them. A blessing in a curse. Or was it the other way around? It had been over 6 years since she was bestowed with the gift of a seer, and she had asked herself more than once whatever her gift was not so much of a gift but a burden. I can fix this, Altair added as an afterthought. The younger counterpart looked at Oracle. Can you tell Natsu I love him? And Arthur and Annie that they are the best children mother could ask for, and Mira that I'm sorry. Can you tell everyone that I'm sorry? Only you will remember. Can you do that? Oracle shook her head and quickly answered. I can't. I won't. Altair stared at her in disbelief. What do you mean you won't? I won't because you won't have a reason to say goodbye for a very long time. You're me. You know what spell I will use and you know it will kill me. Are you denying me at least some form of peace? They have to know I love them. They know it, you stupid girl. Oracle huffed. And you won't use that spell. I will use it. I can't let you do that. And why not? Either way, I'm dead. Let me redeem before I die. I never had a family. You have it. Stay with your family. Altair squeezed her eyes shut and shook her head once again, tears flowing down her cheek. I can't watch you die. Oracle smirked, the scar at the edge of her lips pulling her face. The future looked a lot brighter than she dared to believe. The black path leads to the paradise on earth. Unseen and unheard because no one ever crossed it. Oracle hoped against hope this future would be the one. And as Altair sobbed and cried, her future self knelt on the ground. Arc of time. Last ages, everything disappeared in a flash and the arms of a clock on the tower moved backward. There are 3 things in our universe that exist since the beginning. 3 things made before gods and demons and dragons, before humans were even planned in the grand scheme of things. Those 3 things are time, space and chaos. Those 3 things, made by one but always existing, gave birth to all we know. There are many speculations about whatever the dragons existed before the gods and demons, or whatever the gods and demons existed before. Is one child of the other, or have they all been given birth by the original things? There is no way this could be answered, for gods don't remember, demons can't be trusted, and dragons of the old are dead. The original things are vast and knowledgeable, eternal and always. So how do you control, even hope to control, one of the 3? Magic. The unknown. That which existed since always and since never. The only known and certain child of one of the original things. 2 original things were always in harmony, time and space can't go without the other. Chaos is the dark, the black, the white and the light. The swirl of everything and nothing. Unimaginable, complex, beautiful. Chaos, the origin of magic yet the child of it. Chaos is everything and it is in every time and every space. Magic is everything and it is in every time and every space. Made in order to obtain harmony with time and space, but ended up becoming its bane. The bane of all and harmony of chaos. Time and space obey none and respect none. The change in time and space is the change in harmony of all. Altair stared at the white hair in complete shock. Mira danced over the battleground, hacking and slashing and alive. Her future self was nowhere to be seen and she had to suppress a sob and swallow the tears. Whatever from happiness Mira was here, or deep despair that still clutched her heart at what had happened. What will happen if she doesn't move? Altair, what's gotten into you? Move. Altair blinked and turned on her heel, taking the stone of the ground and throwing it with all her might at Mira's death. The stone morphed into the spear and killed the creature in a spray of blood. Altair's eyes turned on the clock and her eyes burned. Oracle's life, all that the woman did, all her hardship and all her pain. It was all worth nothing more than too few minutes. Altair's eyes hardened. Minutes. But they might be enough. They have to be enough. Laxus slammed his lightning coward fist into the head of the metal creature and caved it in. They just kept coming, for crying out loud. Blood and pain. Laxus stumbled and almost screamed. What the fuck was that? Death. Everyone died. Tears glistened in Laxus' eyes at the strange and terrifying vision. Is that the future? Left. Laxus' head snapped to the side and he practically threw himself on the floor in order to avoid an energy blast from one of the several dozen wingless bastards. Laxus paled at the sight. How many more can there be? As I watched them kill my family, I realized that the solution was so obvious, it was right there. And I missed it. I missed my chance to save them. Laxus' eyes widened and he gathered his magic. Crocus was built on a complex of caverns and pits. One strike on the already damaged ground and it would destroy it. Laxus slammed his fist into the ground, lightning cracked and exploded, coating the streets in yellow light. Dragon Slayer Secret Art, Thunder Blade. The sky cracked and the wingless dragons cried. The ground collapsed much to Laxus' relief and even several of the creatures died in the blast. Laxus stood at the edge of the cliff he made and gazed into the darkness, fairy tale mages walking reluctantly behind him. It was quiet for only a moment before shriek of the little monsters ripped the air and out of the hole exploded a head of a dragon Laxus did not recognize. Dragon clenched his teeth and metal monsters between gave final cry before exploding in a crimson rain. The dragon was huge, bulkier than Acnologia but with a shorter neck. Sand-colored scales of rock marked him as Stone Dragon, but it was not Whiston. Laxus backed away from the hole, his friends following closely behind. The dragon looked around as it pulled out of the hole. You must be the group the prince associates with, Dragon concluded, and Laxus tensed. Who the fuck was the prince? They referred to Rogue as the king, so who was the prince? Ah, no need to be frightened, little one, something's not right. Laxus couldn't pinpoint it, but the dragon, it, didn't have the same aura as the rest. The dragon quickly explained why Souleater had his internal dilemma for nothing. My name is Adalstian the Vast. I am king of stone dragons and I stand before you today on behalf and request of my high king Acnologia. Laxus blinked. Wait, you're on our side? Adalstian mumbled something about manners but nodded his great head. I am. No one commented on the fact they saw Fairy Tail's death because no one was ready to explain it. It was a good thing Adalstian saw it as well, for he wouldn't have come to their battle if he hadn't. Gajil landed a hit, driving his leg-turned metal spike into Dragon's neck. Dragon staggered back, blood dripping from the small wound, and she laughed. You amuse me, mortal. Her voice had a metallic undertone and it sounded just right for someone that tried to kill you. Cold and alien. Because you wounded me, I will tell you my name and you will tell me yours and of your master. Gajil would have responded but stopped, freezing in his spot for a moment at the sight of the purple explosion that swallowed the sky that was not there. Gajil shared a worried glance with Jalal, who nodded back. He saw it as well. Arthur rose from the shadows beside Jalal. Have you seen it? Jalal nodded again. Yes, I am not sure what that was. And 3 shapes flew above, 3 harbingers of death, all wielding the same energy. And the white one was your killer. Be aware of the unseen. Jalal twitched and looked at the metal dragoness he knew was called Blade. She didn't seem to have seen anything. The only thing she did seem to care about at the moment was the mages around her that continued to ignore her. It was a chilling sight when 3 dragons shot through the sky, intertwined in their own deadly dance. Arthur. Jalal spoke sharply to the teen beside him and Arthur immediately stood at attention. Even Annie walked closer. Can you pull everything down? In the shadows, Arthur gave him an incredulous look. Everything. Blue Pegasus is below us. Everything. The 3 dragons disappeared in the smoke and cold sweat glided down their backs. Death is the void. Purple will kill you. Now. Arthur shook but slammed his fist into the ground, shadows spreading around him like an explosion of its own as everything and everyone began to sink before they disappeared. All but Blade, who rose into the air to avoid the shadows only to be swallowed by purple light. Wendy cursed her luck as she avoided another swipe from Levia. The dragon was truly fast, despite his size. But then again, all dragons were, save for a few races, but they more than made up for it in strength. Don't turn. If you turn, you die. Wendy froze for but a second before she had to move again. Wendy, you alright? Urza called from below. I am. Wendy paused. My lungs burst from my chest as I stared in disbelief at the claw protruding from it. Have you seen that? Wendy landed next to Urza from her perch on one roof. Urza trembled, her skin paler for a few shades. I have. And the dragon I knew from the tales flew towards us. Wendy blinked, trying to focus on what is. Concentrate, brat, or you will die. Levia bellowed and slammed his paw into Urza's and Wendy's standing point, snapping his teeth at them once they were in the air. Urza changed into her black wing armor and grabbed Wendy from the air, flying into the air to avoid the claws. Levia growled and launched into the air after them, and Urza cursed. Even though she could fly, her speed was insignificant compared to the water dragon general. Taking the air might be their death, and Urza cursed her luck. Levia gathered the magic in his mouth, but he never fired as a blue shape and a shrill roar pierced the air and Kindra landed on Levia, sending them both into the ground with Levia taking the hit. In fucking oblivion, Levia. Since when do you obey mortals? Kindra screeched, not exactly acting queen-ish. Levia froze at the sound of her voice before he started tossing under the queen, trying to free himself. King Rogue is not a mortal. He is all. Kindra looked sickened. King Rogue, you got your brains washed, you wet behind the ears, idiot. Natsu exited the void, feeling the damage Havoc's attack left, and he knew that he was losing quite a bit of blood after everything. Whatever that attack with voids was one of the deadliest he had ever seen. They are dead, all of them, and I am but a bystander as I watch myself attack my father. Something I hoped I will never have to do again. And even before, when this happened, I had a reason. He knew it, he knows it now, but this is the first time I saw grief in those blue orbs that were always so cold. Natsu blinked and his eyes stung. He knew what that was because he had seen visions before. Nothing like this and not without someone else's help, but he had seen enough to recognize a prediction when he saw one. But everyone he cared about was still alive. It changed. That horror won't happen now. Natsu's eyes blazed as he looked at Havoc and his father fighting in the air. The easiest way to win this is to kill the man behind it. Rogue, King Rogue, is no king of his. Natsu was not sure he ever hated anyone this much and had hated a lot. But this was the kind of hate that consumed you. And he knew, even without Rogue's protests and curses in his mind, that the man will never control him. He missed his chance. There is one thing worse than a demon or a god out to kill you. When dragon hunts, no amount of hiding will help you, and even the demons will pity you. Natsu glanced at his father, his body shaking with fury. There was a moment of pause as he contemplated whatever to return to his father's side or attack Rogue. He won't have trouble killing him, but he couldn't stand the thought of losing Acnologia after everything. He had faith in his father, and the High King was doing well on his own against one of the original, but he just couldn't risk it. Natsu turned to search for Rogue, or more precisely Motherglare, for he knew Rogue was still riding on. A roar sounded through the crocus. One of the many, but every dragon sounded different, and he recognized this roar. He would recognize it anywhere. Igneel came crashing down on Havoc like a meteor, and Demur sent the white dragon flying the moment Igneel was off with a roar. Acnologia. Igneel looked around worriedly. What kind of sacrilege is this? All of this dragons died ages ago. Not all. Demur noted, grimly nodding his head towards Atlas Flame, and the dragons gathered had to feel sorry for the sorrowful look that settled on Igneel's face. The three scattered when Havoc rose again, furious, and fired a roar of frightening proportions. This isn't necromancy, uncle. As much as it may look that way, Natsu spoke as he rose to their heights, and Igneel turned to look at him, and the newcomers fell silent for a second, taking in the bloodied form of their prince. You don't look so good, Demur remarked, and Natsu leveled him with a half-lidded look. Duly noted. Natsu turned to look at Acnologia, but Havoc returned, and this time he was not alone. Natsu frowned. He had no idea what he had done at that moment when his anger peaked, but he somehow managed to push Rogue out. And apparently Rogue was not happy, for now he stood on Motherglare's head, the metal dragon flying only a few feet behind Havoc. Natsu looked at the man playing God. The idiocy required of someone to willingly flew into a middle of a fight between four dragons was something he failed to comprehend. But that is not important now. Natsu's eyes burned into Rogue as his lips pulled back, revealing a row of sharp teeth. He came to his executioner, and death shouldn't be kept waiting. Rogue looked pretty angry himself, obviously not glad that after everything the Dragon Prince pushed him out. You made your last mistake, Soul Eater. Rogue yelled over the destruction around them, his voice barely heard as it got carried by the winds, but the madman paid that no mind as he continued. I will kill every one of you today. You will all be dead by the time I'm done with you. Acnologia didn't look impressed. You are the only one who will die today, mortal. Igneel nodded beside him, his mouth slightly agape, and a warm light of the burning inferno inside him slowly seeped through as he prepared to fire a roar at slightest move the human riding dragon made. Igneel, Acnologia barked, and the Fire Dragon King looked at his High King. Atlas Flame is not opposed. Deal with him however you see fit, but do not kill him. Igneel nodded grimly. If the situation wasn't so dire he would have snorted. Like he would actually hurt his best friend. Should I stay here? It would be for the best, in my opinion, Demur spoke, his eyes not leaving Havoc and Motherglare, who didn't move to attack. Not yet. Acnologia considered this, his eyes moving briefly to Natsu, and the High King wasn't very sure if his son will stay in the air for long. Acnologia nodded before he turned to Natsu. You stay behind. No, Natsu responded, glaring at his father. I will kill him. He referred to Rogue, who raised an eyebrow. You are aware I can hear you. I will kill him as slowly as possible. And you won't stop me. Demur blinked. The Dragon Prince was a force to be reckoned with, for sure, but he did not look so good. Acnologia was aware of that as well, but the king knew there was no use arguing. Natsu will hear a lecture on disobedience later. Right now they had a fight to win. Losing isn't an option. It never was. The dark sky remained silent. The smoke was getting thicker even now when it seemed nothing was left to be burned. The time seemed to have stopped for that brief second as the three dragons stared at their unmoving opponents. How long will this last? Natsu wondered. What are we waiting for? Havoc. Rogue's voice was soft but strong, and it was almost missed by the Dragon Prince, but even as quiet as it was, it seemed to be the thing that was needed for the time to move again. And the sky exploded in lights as dragons released their roars. Natsu dived under Havoc's roar and soared up, butting his head into Havoc's stomach while Acnologia clawed at White Dragon's head. Natsu pushed and turned in the air, avoiding a long claw that tried to bury itself in his skull, but the sharp extension of Havoc's paw caught his eye and a long gash now decorated his head, but Natsu only released a sharp breath, teeth snapping at the tail, biting hard enough to reach the bone. Havoc roared and turned to better face Natsu, his controlled mind ignoring the danger that was Acnologia, who sent the old dragon plummeting towards the ground. Natsu prepared to accelerate his fall with a roar, but a metal wing met his back, scratching deeper into already exposed flesh. Natsu howled as he crashed into the roof of one of the few buildings that weren't completely collapsed. The building did collapse after the hit, and Natsu found himself sprawled over the ground. With a growl, the Dragon Prince looked up at Motherglare, who sent him down. The metal dragon was once again occupied by DISCLAIMER, and Natsu shook his head, trying to figure out if his eye was only clouded by blood or if Havoc managed to permanently damage it. This needed to end now. "Father," he called as loud as he could to get Acnologia to listen to him. Acnologia was an old dragon, who fought many battles, so he was in no danger of actually turning his head away from the original one. What? Despite that, Acnologia was not very happy to be distracted, even a little, by the conversation. "If we kill Motherglare and Rogue, this all will be over." Acnologia ducked under Havoc's roar, but it caught the tip of his wing, making him miss the white dragon's head and instead his its back. "What are you proposing? If you haven't noticed, I'm a bit busy." Dragon's Bane. Acnologia almost paused before he looked down at his son for a second, to see if he was completely serious. A wicked grin spread across Acnologia's face when determined red eyes met his blue orbs. "ＤISCLAIMER," Acnologia bellowed, and the Iron Dragon kind avoided a swipe from Motherglare. "Move aside." The king nodded, unable to speak as he released a roar, sending Motherglare flying back through the air. Acnologia landed beside Natsu. Havoc hovered above them, watching them for the moment. Natsu thanked the white dragon for that, even though it was not consciously done. "Dragon King Sacred Art," Acnologia chanted, gathering his magic as Natsu chanted beside him, his voice in sync with his own, just as they had practiced all those years ago. "Dragon Prince Sacred Art." The two opened their mouth, but instead of the reds, blues and blacks, white seeped out. "Dragon's Bane." The words shook the ground as white beams shot out of the two's mouth, rushing and warping around each other, turning gold as they combined. DISCLAIMER rushed to the side when the two finished, the golden beam rushing towards Motherglare. Motherglare cried, and Rogue, still riding on its head, screamed. The light hit the control dragon and exploded, blinding all of them for a moment. The dust rose and the ground shook once again as Motherglare collided with the earth. It was an old spell, one Acnologia learned to perform with Havoc. Only two Chaos Dragons can perform it, and even with their combined effort, he could feel his reserves almost reach their bottom. He was low on magic, but it was not an overly large problem. It will be over soon if Natsu is right. The dust cleared and Natsu watched as Motherglare whined on the ground pitifully. Its wings pulled out of their joints and disintegrated, and he knew the dragon's magic container was empty, departed until the day he died. A downed dragon is a dead one. And Motherglare won't rise again. Natsu rose into the air, ignoring the pain that burned his body. He flew towards the downed dragon, and he heard his father flying above him, obviously keeping an eye on Havoc, who was once again frozen, obviously fighting his own battle with Rogue. Rogue wasn't on Motherglare anymore, Natsu noted as he landed on Motherglare and bit down at its neck. He clenched his teeth as much as possible as the dragon gave a weak fight before Natsu pulled half of his neck out, spitting the foul blood that tasted even more of iron than it should. He was aware Rogue was screaming further away on the ground, clutching at the lump that was left of his leg that was torn off during the fall. The moment Rogue saw Natsu's red eyes looking at him, the crazed dragon slayer stopped just screaming and started talking, though his voice still stayed high, the pain unbearable to him. "Kill him, you die today, Rogue," Natsu spoke, his jaw opening, a roar charging as he had full intent on using the last scrap of magic he had in his body to kill the man he hated like no other. Carla was not very productive in this fight, but she still tried to help as she hovered above Laxus, who was panting. The metal things were finally gone, and Adalstian stood beside them, old eyes sharp and focused as the Dragon King searched for any threat they might have missed. It was in that sudden calm after a bloody battle that a chill went down her spine and a vision played in front of her eyes. A vision she has already seen, but this one was colored. Who would thought colors could be so frightening? Her heart froze and she felt cold to the bone at what she saw. "That's not Acnologia." Carla's body filled with dread as she repeated, this time out loud. "That's not Acnologia." She couldn't believe it. She refused to believe it. But it was the truth. What are you talking about? Laxus asked as he turned to look at the exceed above him, his face turning from confusion to alarm when he saw the tiny cat crying her eyes out. Acnologia is not red and black and his eyes aren't red either. Laxus didn't understand, but to Carla, it made perfect sense. They sentenced him to death by keeping this from him. Acnologia's eyes flashed red. Acnologia's eyes aren't red. Acnologia kept his eyes on Havoc. The old dragon twitched in the air several times before going still. He could see another dragon moving closer, one he did not recognize that had silver wings, one of the few that hasn't been in a true fight since arriving in another dragon, the stone dragon Wiston, with a tail like a spear. Natsu stood his ground even as his vision swam. A shadow flew above him. He could feel it, more than see it, but he believed it was Acnologia. After all, his father was behind him. He would guard his back while he blasted the wizard that still screamed and called for his killing. He should have been more careful. But it was too late when he realized it was not Acnologia above him but Havoc, and the original one landed on his back, bringing his clawed paw on his back as he pulled at his wings with teeth and claws. He released the roar he was charging in his shock, and the screaming man was silenced. The pain shot through him quickly as Havoc's pull resulted in a tearing sound that echoed in his head. His wings were pulled out of their joints and one almost tore off. When had he started screaming? It was more of a howl, really, filled with pain and anguish. Dragons' wings were sensitive. To do this to a dragon, it was the worst type of torture one could do. In the haze the pain created, he almost thanked whoever stopped it. His one good eye rolled to look who rescued him from the pain. When had he fallen to the ground? Wiston's tail was buried in his exposed chest. Natsu blinked slowly, not fully understanding what it meant. He tried to move slightly, the tail in his chest scrapped over the stone beneath him. Shouldn't it hurt more? But it didn't. He couldn't move anymore, and it took all his strength to open his eyes when he blinked. Why, they could stay closed. Sleep sounded nice. He wasn't sure if he felt hot or cold before he realized he didn't feel anything. Floating. Yes, sleep sounded nice. The dragon prince closed his eyes. He will wake up later. Rogue was dead, so no one was in danger anymore. Mira and Altair were safe now. Annie and Arthur were safe as well, and so was Wendy. His family was safe, so it was okay to sleep. Just for a bit. But the dragon prince didn't open his eyes after that. He just stayed there with his eyes closed as he slowly drifted into an eternal sleep. There are two points of view when one looks at death. One comes from the dead and the other from the living. To the living, death is cruel, ugly, cold and painful because they have to stay behind. The people who survive have to live with these unbearable feelings. Waking up every day knowing that they won't see him or her ever again. Pain and sorrow will be the first thing that greets them in the morning and only grows stronger throughout the day, until one day it might begin to fade away. Not completely, never completely, but at least to a point where it's bearable to live with. Or at least for most people there is. The pain of a permanent change will stay until the day the living die. For the deceased, it's different. They view death differently, almost like a friend, the liberator who freed them from the pain and suffering that comes with being alive. No strings attached to anything, and no suffering when those strings break. That's how most dead and alive creatures saw death, either as a black hole filled with despair and pain or as a smiling and kind friend. Natsu was thankful to be free of the physical pain when death pulled his soul out of the body. He wasn't even aware he was dying while it was happening. Floating, that's how it felt. Dying was very much like floating, Natsu decided. Or was he already dead? Probably he was now nothing more than an odd flicker of light to the living, and he won't be even that for long. He could already feel the gentle pull of the afterlife. But he couldn't go yet. To others, he might be a flicker of light, but he could very well see his body, or more accurately his soul that took the form of his body. His human body. I always thought my soul would be in the form of a dragon, Natsu wondered. Another pull on his soul made him sigh as he floated through the void tunnel. He had no idea how exactly he got there, considering he didn't enter it, but he couldn't be bothered by it just yet. Give me a bit more time, he pleaded with whatever was pulling him. Useless probably. I need to make sure of something. Natsu stopped in front of the door that led out of the void. The door that had magnolia tree carved in. He still remembered what he saw so many years ago, in the Tower of Heaven. His hand moved to the knob, shaped like a branch of the tree, but before he could touch it the door opened and the soul stepped out into the glaring sun of Magnolia's afternoon. And then he stopped, rooted to the spot in his overwhelming shock. Magnolia's streets were full. The town was always busy at this hour, but this was not usual. All those people were wearing black, he soon realized, and a red rose was held in every pair of hands. A funeral, Natsu quickly realized. A whole procession, in fact. His eyes searched the faces. Some he recognized as a member of one guild or the other he saw in passing. Some looked a lot like Crocus guards, and it took him a moment to spot Arcadia's grim face as the tall man walked on. There were people he never saw before as well, and as the procession moved on he wondered whose funeral it was. Natsu swallowed thickly. Did someone else die? Surely this wasn't for him. But who could it be? There was only one way to find out, he realized, and the soul moved up, ready to move to the front of the procession. He stopped in his attempt as shadows flew above his head and he jerked his neck up, his eyes widening at the sight of dragons decorating the sky. People looked surprisingly calm considering dragons were flying above them. They were aware of them before, Natsu concluded. He didn't notice them before, as high as they were flying, and since people were so calm they must have known they were there. That, however, dragged another question. Why are dragons here? He looked at them, trying to recognize their shapes from the distance, and the sun glaring down at him did not help. A hand over his narrowed eyes, Natsu spent several moments staring at the strange sight. Himmel was there and so was Kindra. Adalstian flew higher, but his bulky shape was somewhat easy to recognize. Demur was also there and a few more he wasn't so sure. Further in front of the small group in the sky was Igniel, and was that Acnologia? Why was his father at a funeral of some mortal? Or was it not the funeral of a mortal? Natsu's eyes turned down, gazing at the moving crowd. Was this his funeral? Why were there so many people? The last time he witnessed his funeral, even though it was just a trick his mind played, there were only 4 people on it. There was at least 400 now. He didn't even know all of them. It made no sense, and Natsu rubbed his forehead trying to make sense of it. Seeing no reason to keep standing in one spot with no answers, the dead dragon moved towards the front of the crowd. The closer he moved, the more familiar the faces became. When he reached the front, he realized it was his guild that surrounded the 4 people carrying the coffin. Mira and Altir walked with Annie right behind it, along with Wendy, and Natsu's very soul hurt at the sight of them. The uneasy feeling that was wrapped around him like a cloak finally settled. He was dead. This was his funeral. His family was hurt because of him. He was dead. He thought he was already fine with it, but he only now truly acknowledged it. This is something he couldn't fix. It hurts, doesn't it? Natsu jumped, looking to his right. Beside him stood Mavis, much to his shock. You can see me. What if she wasn't talking to him? No, Mavis replied with a sad smile. Not completely. I can see the way light dances through your soul. I can only see your shadow, if it can be called that. But I can hear you. I'm dead. Natsu felt stupid for pointing that out. I know. Mavis dipped her blonde head. Natsu stared at the glass coffin with one red rose inside. The only thing that his previous vision and the real version shared. Gray and Arthur carried the front of the coffin, Laxus and Gajiel standing behind. They will miss you. They already miss you, Mavis said softly, her eyes looking towards him. I will miss them as well, Natsu admitted after a moment, once again feeling the pull on his soul. The procession reached Magnolia's graveyard, and Natsu and Mavis settled on the roof of the mausoleum in the middle of it, watching the glass coffin without a body as the 4 men slowly lowered it into the ground. Do you know where is my body? Natsu, before he could stop himself. He shouldn't bother Mavis with such questions, but he was wondering. No, not really, Mavis admitted. After Crocus, Acnologia and other dragons took it. Do you know you saved Crocus? The question surprised him, shocked him even. Me? How did I save Crocus? I died while dragons were still there. I only killed Rogue, and that could have been done by anyone. Mavis giggled but quickly stopped, a frown tugging her lips down, the morbid atmosphere quickly drowning any sort of amusement. Silly you, she spoke quietly. You don't even know what you've done, don't you? When you killed Rogue, the roar that obliterated him destroyed the Eclipse Gate behind. When the gates were destroyed, the dragons returned to their time. Natsu blinked. I did that. You did? Is that why so many people are here? Because I saved them, Natsu spoke, stumbling over the word for a moment. He was no savior. He was a destroyer, killer. Kira. It was a moniker he hadn't heard in a long time, but people still recognized him for it. Not just because of that, Mavis objected. Some, yes, but most are here because they recognize you as someone who was a powerful wizard, an awesome dad, a caring brother, a great son, an amazing friend. Natsu shook his head. He wasn't any of that except for maybe powerful, but there were those more powerful than him. Makarov started talking, his words similar to Maviz's, but he didn't listen. Not really. His eyes were locked on the small group of people he recognized through his life and in his death as his family. Mira was crying, her head buried into Elfman's chest as he softly patted her head, her beautiful cerulean eyes red and puffy. How long has she been crying because of him? Altair stood in front of the hole where his coffin lied, staring at it with hollow expression, her pale face frozen in a mask devoid of any emotion, but her eyes betrayed her tears more silent than Myra's, but they still shined on her face. Annie was wrapped in Altair's arms as the girl cried, clutching her mother's arms like they were her lifeline. Arthur stood to Altair's left, his head bowed, shadow hiding his face from Natsu's view. Another pull on his soul made him hiss. They were becoming stronger. Are you all right? Mavis asked worriedly, looking at the flickering light that was Natsu. Afterlife is pulling me, ah. Natsu looked at her, contemplating whatever he should ask, how she managed to stay in the mortal plane but decided against it. He shouldn't privy into her life, or death. How long do you have? Mavis asked after a moment. I believe I already passed that limit. It's only my willpower that keeps me here, and even that won't last for long. The silence that followed on the roof of the small mausoleum was suffocating even to his soul, and it gave him unwanted time to think through the events taking place. The rational part of him didn't see a reason to be sad. Why would you be sad over your own death? Death was freedom. You don't have to worry about anything trivial. Life was for worrying. And even as those thoughts went through his mind, he could feel his eyes stinging. He knew he would have plenty to worry once he entered afterlife. He wouldn't go to heaven or soul society or whatever it was called. He already had his little place in hell. In Ozil. He had it from the moment Acnologia put demon's heart in him. But his eyes didn't sting because of that, his shoulders didn't shake because of what he would endure. He didn't know spirits can cry, but apparently, they could. Natsu stopped the tear from spilling. He didn't cry when he was alive, and he wouldn't in his death. The Dragon Prince looked up at the sun, trying to burn the tears away. He would never see any of them again. Never again. Never was such a long time. Natsu. Mavis spoke quietly after what felt like an eternity. She reached out, towards the flicker of light, but to her dismay, her fingers only passed through it. Natsu buried his head in his hands before running them over his forehead. He knew for a long time what would happen to him after he died, but for the first time since he learned of his faith it bothered him. He watched as Mira and Altair threw the first two roses, and another thought struck him. He never said goodbye. His eyes hardened and the soul stood up, eyes briefly looking at Mavis. Thank you. Mavis smiled in response, watching with sad eyes as the flicker jumped from the roof of the mausoleum and crossed toward two women, not even bothering to avoid people, simply walking through them. Natsu stopped between Altair and Mira before looking at the rose in Annie's hands. The young teenager stared at it, not willing to let go, like it would make his death all the more real. He smiled softly as his fingers warped around the rose, half expecting they would just pass through, but he smiled in triumph when the rose twitched and Annie's eyes widened slightly. Annie, Natsu spoke softly, still holding the rosé. Let go. He wasn't really sure what he was referring to. It wasn't just the rose, at least he knew that much. Annie sniffed and nodded, her eyes never leaving his, and he wondered if she could actually see him and hear him. She pulled out of Altair's hands and stepped forward, through her father and through the rosé. As another pull jolted his soul, Natsu jumped to his feet and rushed to Altair, not truly thinking, but he wanted to hug her. He wanted to hug this amazing woman. Just one last time. She and Mira meant the world to him. It almost made him scream when he passed through her, unable to touch her. Just one last time, Natsu whispered to himself, turning to Mira Jane. Please. He reached out, his fingers only an inch from her shoulder when his soul has pulled once again, but this time he knew it was final. His time was up. Mavis watched from her spot in sorrow as the flicker disappeared, leaving no trace of it behind. The place he found himself in next time he was aware of himself was pitch black, a starking contrast to the blinding light of Magnolia's sun. Natsu moved his hands over the rocky ground he was lying on, trying to make some semblance of where he was. It didn't help much, which annoyed the dragon further. With no better thing to do, he pushed himself into a sitting position, blinking rapidly to adjust his eyes to the dark. He was surprised to find himself in what looked like a forest once he could actually see it. The ground was barren and the impossibly huge trees burned, but it still looked like a forest. I wondered, how long will you be able to resist? A familiar voice spoke and Natsu's head snapped to the side. Lilith stared back at him, her red eyes glowing playfully in the dark. Where are we? The dragon blinked at the sound of his own voice. In hell, obviously, Lilith laughed. Only first floor though, you need to get down. Her grin turned feral, snake tongue sneaking out of her lips for a second. And I'm here to lead you there. Altair pushed the doors of the guild open, Arthur and Annie trailing behind her. Fairy Tail returned to their old guild hall little over 2 weeks ago. The stone building that could easily be described as a castle never sat well with her. It reminded her too much of her time in Grimoire Heart and Master Hades. Lizana gave a half-hearted wave in their direction when she noticed them from the bar and Altair frowned. She hoped she would find Mira behind the bar. Myris in the library again? Altair asked when she reached the bar, setting the bag with guild's part of the money from the mission the three completed on the counter. Lizana nodded solemnly. She hasn't come out since you left. Arthur glared at the cup presented before him by Lizana. They were on a mission for almost 2 weeks and it has been 3 since the funeral. His white-haired mother practically moved to the library since Natsu died. She refused to speak of what she was looking for, but it started worrying him more and more. He stole a glance at Annie. His sister has already engaged in a quiet conversation with Wendy, one-sided as it was. Annie barely talked since the funeral and Arthur knew she saw something, but every time he tried to talk to her about that, Annie fell silent or changed the subject. Wendy was another mystery to him. That night Natsu passed, the girl kept apologizing to his corpse, but later she didn't feel the need to elaborate. Everyone was acting weird and Arthur had trouble sleeping because of it all. He didn't deny it though, he was acting differently as well. Myra's absence was not helping anyone, but no one had the heart to drag the woman away from whatever she was doing since it seemed to be the only thing keeping her grounded. Arthur turned in the chair he occupied and pushed off of it. Where are you going? Altair looked at him sharply and Arthur tried to force a smile on his face, but it only ended up looking like a grimace. The time mage wasn't willing to let them out of her sight. Not since. I'm going to check on Mom in the library, see if she wanted some company, or help. Altair seemed to consider it for a moment longer than necessary but nodded in the end. Arthur bobbed his head as well, but without a particular reason. The teen turned after that and made a beeline to the library, avoiding any and all pitying looks and prying eyes. The door was ajar but barely, almost closed completely when he reached them. Arthur watched the shadow moving inside, not really capable of bringing himself to enter. He didn't have trouble remembering Natsu sitting in there when the pink-haired dragon needed some peace and quiet, reading one book or another, or simply sitting there meditating if leaving the guild wasn't an option. Gods, how he missed him. Arthur rubbed his cheek furiously when he felt a tear slide down. He cleared his throat and gently pushed the doors open, knocking on the frame to alert Mira of his arrival. Mira Jane's head snapped up at the sudden noise from where she sat in the middle of one of the piles of books that littered the floor. Arthur frowned when he saw her but did not comment on the obvious lack of sleep and food the woman had in the last couple of weeks. Hey, Arthur," her voice was hoarse and uneasy as she stood up. "I didn't know you came back already." Arthur raised an eyebrow at that. "Already? We were gone for 2 weeks." Mira blinked. 2 weeks. She turned to look around the room, muttering something to herself. Arthur was getting seriously worried. "What are you doing, anyway?" Mira gave him a weak smile that looked more painful than it ever should. "Just some research. To take my mind off of." She trailed off and Arthur nodded in understanding. His green eyes searched the room as he ran his hand through the blonde locks. His eyes stopped on the black envelope that stood open on one of the piles of books that decorated the table. A red wax seal had a symbol he didn't recognize, but if he had to guess he would say it was a guild symbol. The structure was angular, nothing like the flowing lines of the fairy tale symbol. It almost resembled 2 crossed hammers, and his train of thoughts was cut short as Mira stepped in his line of sight, blocking his view on the mysterious envelope. "What's that envelope?" Arthur asked before Mira could speak. Mira moved uncomfortably, obviously trying to find something to say. Arthur frowned and quickly ducked around her, grabbing the parchment that was poking out of the black envelope, turning it around to read. He didn't go further than 2 words before it was snatched out of his fingers and Mira glared at him with surprising force. But he only needed one word to know everything he needed to know. Necromancy. Arthur shuddered. What do you think you're doing? Myra's glare was quickly melted into a wide-eyed look of a deer caught in headlights. Necromancy. That's forbidden for a reason, Mother. It's taboo magic, for crying out loud. Arthur fumed. But I can do it. Myra screamed, stomping her feet on the ground. You don't know that. I do. Arthur froze. There was far too much conviction in that sentence. Mother, what did you do? Myra bit her lower lip but turned around and walked to the back of the library, pulling something out of a box. It took Arthur a moment to recognize that the furry thing in his mother's hands was a dead rat. The she-devil pushed books off of one table without a care, with one hand, the other still clutching the dead mammal. The heavy tomes hit the floor with a bang, raising dust from the floor and revealing dark markings and runes covering the table. Oh, my God! Arthur bit down on his thumb, eyes darting between the rat and Myra, who carefully lit a candle. Lilith stood tensely in the enormous chamber, so tall the ceilings decorated in golden mirrors and silver seemed miles away. Winged bat-like gargoyle statues were perched on the frames of the upside-down windows, almost as tall as ceilings, of architecture similar to humans' Gothic architecture, but this one preceded it by eons and eras. In the center of the room, so cold, Lilith had no doubt she would freeze to death in a matter of minutes if she wasn't dead already, stood a giant tree reminiscent to willow, but there was no leaves, only the naked branches, black and dead-looking. Lilith was here before. Of course, being a messenger of the gods of the underworld did entail some privileges. Entering the infamous ninth circle with the new souls was one of them. Lilith's cold eyes didn't move away from the 9 figures sitting in a circle around the tree. 9 gods of underworld, supreme demons: Berstuk, Morrigan, Hell, Satan, Hades, Osiris, Anubis, Minerva and Anxarum. The strongest creatures in all 9 circles of hell. Lilith witnessed the creation of lesser demons before, not often, but it happened in her long life several times, but this demon was different. The soul of Natsu Souleater was special, and already demons whispered about the new edition that wasn't even created yet. It was happening at that very moment. The ceremony always managed to amaze Lilith with its seeming simplicity, yet even after centuries, she still remembered the pain that left her screaming for weeks after fully transforming. The Supreme circled the tree and the soul entered it. The unholy tree peeled of its bark like it was doors, calling the sinner inside and then warping it in cold embrace. And that was it, at least on the outside. Lilith knew the Supreme spoke when they created the demon, shaping the soul with their energy that could never be called magic, yet it was just that in all but name. But the speech, the incantation, was not heard by anyone but the one inside the tree. It was almost a week since they arrived in the 9th circle and 2 weeks after arriving in the underworld. And for a week the Supreme sat around the tree and did not move. Lilith couldn't imagine how much power was already spent in shaping the soul. That was the beauty of being a deity, god of heaven or underworld, she supposed. No one could feel your power. It was divided from the rest of the beings of the dimension. Only a god could feel the power of another god. And as Lilith watched the process, the black bark of the tree split and a new shape fell out, screaming like its magic was on fire, and Lilith knew that that was exactly what was happening. The magic in Souleater was burning away, leaving room for the new energy to arrive and nestle. He won't use magic anymore, at least it won't be called magic. He will be a curse user like every other demon. Souleater's screams were hoarse and dry. The voice of the silent dead dragon prince was obviously not used often to speak loudly. Not that he needed to shout to be heard, Lilith knew. She knew the boy since he was a child, and she watched him on behalf of Supreme for years, watched as he became more powerful than should be possible. In a matter of years, a mere human suppressed her, a centuries-old demon. Lilith sighed. She did not feel guilty, even though anyone with a shred of compassion should have. She, after all, led the dragon prince right into the 9th circle. 2 weeks ago Natsu looked around the barren place Lilith led him through for what felt like days, but the lack of sun, hunger or tiredness made him unsure how long the two were walking. He was frustrated the demoness refused to tell him how long until they get to wherever it was they were going to, but he did not show his frustration, settling for a soundless sigh, evident only by the parting of his lips before he rubbed his left eye where Havoc's claw left its mark. His vision in the damaged eye was blurred to the point where only blobs of light and dark were visible, and it irritated the dead dragon prince to no end. His vision was superb, something he always prided himself on. Lilith caught some semblance on what he was thinking as she leads him through the dark forest. The The wounds on your mortal body were carried to the afterlife as scars, only those above are free of them. Natsu nodded, feeling no need to ask who those above were. Lilith never made a secret of how much she hated gods and angels. A shadow in the corner of his good eye caught his attention and the pink-haired man looked around, trying to spot a shadow that always seemed to stay just out of his sight. Don't bother. Lilith released an annoyed sigh, and Natsu had a feeling her annoyance had nothing to do with him. Ghosts of the sinners roam around the first circle. Every circle is designed to punish one of the 7 deadly sins, at least that's how it's categorized. The first circle is the circle of sloth. They are cursed to forever wander the large forest because if they stop Cerberus will eat them. Natsu raised an eyebrow before he took another look around. He didn't see a Cerberus since he woke up in the barren forest. Once again Lilith answered the question he never asked. Because no one stopped somewhere close to you. Cerberus is a vile creature and you don't want to meet him. That being said, first circle is huge, you couldn't even imagine. There is a possibility they are somewhere else at the moment. The dragon was starting to grow annoyed by her apparent mind-reading powers he wasn't previously aware existed. Don't be ridiculous. Your face is just easy to read. No, it's not, usually it isn't, Lilith allowed with a grin. Natsu sighed as Lilith led him further into the cursed forest. It seemed like hours later, even though it could have been only a few minutes, that the two reached a ridiculously large staircase that led below ground level and deeper into the eternal inferno. I presume this leads to the second circle. Natsu leaned over the edge to look down but his eyes couldn't see the bottom. Was it hundreds of feet away or thousand? Yes, the circle of lust, Lilith educated the dragon. Those ghosts are guarded by shepherds. Natsu had trouble imagining an old man with a stick walking around and keeping sinners in check. If one of them misbehave, they put them into a pot. Lilith gave a small barking laughter before continuing. Being cooked here hurts just as much if not more as it does when you're alive. Not to mention that to shepherds misbehaving and moving is basically the same thing and they do like chopping you to pieces before you are cooked. Easier to chew, they say. Natsu could definitely see why should someone refrain from being lustful during life. Well, no use in waiting at the edge. Get going. Natsu's eyes widened as Lilith slammed her hand into his back sending him toppling over the edge. Lilith's chilling but surprisingly joyful laughter echoed, scaring the sinners that roamed the first circle while Natsu's very colorful curses faded as he fell deeper. Present time asterisk ignoring to the best of her ability the agony-filled screams Lilith survived the change in Natsu's looks. The 9 already stood up from where they sat but didn't move further, watching with different dose of interest at the writhing demon at their feet. He was covered in the slime of the tree, thick and a sick purple in color but it quickly slid off him even as Lilith watched. He looked a lot like his former demon form, Lilith decided. The coloring was different, there was not a trace of red on the scales that covered his arms and legs and blended with his even paler, almost grayish skin. The scars reminded, just like Lilith knew they would and his hair was shorter, reaching barely past his shoulders but it lost any semblance of order it gained with the length, each strand sticking in its own direction as soon as the slime slid off of his now horned head. 2 wings were practically the same as was the tail but the tip of the tail bent and flattened and only when the slime disappeared did Lilith realize the sharp edge of the tip that looked like a blade. Wendy took a sickly shade of green as she stared at the until recently dead rat running in the carbon box on one of library tables. Bloody hell, was all Gray shared of his thoughts while Urza only nodded dumbly in agreement, her mind going blank. Jalal, the usually calm and collected wizard, was looking between the rat and Mira Jane as if trying to decide who to kill first and other 2 dragon slayers made no secret just how disgusted they were by the animal, their superior senses telling them just how wrong the dead rat was. Arthur stood beside Mira like he wanted to make sure she wouldn't run off and Annie looked ready to cry where she sat with Lucy in one of the sofas. Altair stood to the side, staring with a blank face at the rat, no emotion on her face whatsoever but just below the surface raged a hurricane. All right, Jalal broke the silence and pinched the bridge of his nose. Quote, I'll give you a chance to explain why would you do something so utterly idiotic and completely immoral and when I hear your explanation we will burn every last trace of this ever happening. Mira took offense to that. You will not burn this. It's the only chance we might get to bring him back. And it's wrong. Jalal shot back, his magic responding in a flare to his anger. Of all people to do this. He was not done. I expected this sort of idiocy from a dunderhead like Gajil. Hey, but not from you. You should be smarter than this. Mira glowered at the blue-haired man but stayed quiet, obviously unable to come up with a valid argument. The library was cast in silence once again when Annie suddenly looked up, her eyes puffy but cheeks dry. Can you really do that, Mama? Can you really bring Dad home? Altair gasped, making noise for the first time since she entered the library. Annie. What was left of Altair's heart shattered at the desperate hope in girl's voice. Where did you even get this? Laxus somehow got hold of the letter with weird seal. And whose? ZD. Quote. Myra's eyes widened and she quickly crossed the room, taking the letter out of Laxus' grasp. This is a personal letter. Lazis raised an eyebrow in question, but before he could respond, letter found its way into Gajiel's hands, who started reading out loud. Dear Mrs. Dragneel, I hope my letter found you. Please, accept my condolences. I am truly devastated to hear of Mr. Dragneel's passing. He was a very dear friend who I'm sorry to say I haven't kept in touch. I am sure you are grieving as well, and since I can relate to the feeling of losing a family member, so I will give you advice, one you don't have to follow but I am sure you will at least consider it. I am very well versed in the art of necromancy, something I'm sure you've heard of, but I assure you that it is by no means as dangerous or sacrilegious as our society leads one to believe. Necromancy is the art that breaks down barriers set by mere humans and allows us to not only communicate or even temporarily revive our dead loved ones. I revived my brother and I watched him grow into a man instead of sitting by his grave. He was my only family and I couldn't leave him dead. He was a happy boy and grew into an amazing man. There were no consequences to his health, mental or physical. Listen to an advice of an old man and learn the art. The books I sent you should be more than enough. Sincerely, ZD. Gajiel made a weird face, staring into the initials at the bottom like that would reveal the name behind it. He sounds like a creep if you ask me. Do you even know who that is? And why the hell is he using surname, Dragneel? This someone from another dimension or what? Mira shook her head. I'm not sure. I can't say I ever heard Natsu mention anyone whose name starts with Z or D. Altair's eyes rolled to Gajiel and she extended her hand and Gajiel passed the letter without complaint. Altair looked over the page before turning it around. When she didn't spot anything out of the ordinary with it, she channeled her magic into the hand and before Mira could even raise her voice, the paper disintegrated into dust. Why did you do that? Mira screeched, eyes wide and quickly filling with rage. Altair scoffed. You want to explain to Master Makarov what's written inside? It will be easier to just say we're on a mission and leave no trace of what happened here. Myra's anger disappeared like a candlelight in the wind. Are you saying that we're going to do this, whatever this is? Altair asked, one elegant eyebrow raised in challenge. Of course. Jalal stared at the purple-haired woman. But, Altair, not you too. This is dark magic. Altair eyed the other mage. Dark magic? I don't doubt that. This is probably the darkest branch of magic ever invented. But really, what choice do we have? Besides, this won't be the first time I use dark magic. She sent Jalal a pointed look. Jalal's face was going red, but it didn't seem anger as much as despair. He wanted to see Natsu again, Altair knew. Natsu was his best friend ever since he joined and they worked out their differences, but the sheer magnitude of what they were discussing made her just as unsure into it as it did him. The only difference was that she was more desperate than him. We should leave him to rest, Jalal finally said, his voice taking a tone of a man begging for the two girls to stop suggesting it. Because, Jalal knew, he would cave in too quickly. But is he really resting? Gray's eyes looked hunted suddenly. What are you saying? Arthur looked at Gray sharply. Lucy stared at Gray for a moment and as if realizing what the other teen was thinking, she paled. You can't seriously think that. Gray shuddered. I don't know what to think, but you remember when Natsu spoke of his dragonification for the first time in front of the guild? At least those who were there should remember. Wendy swallowed and turned white as a sheet as one by one. Wizards who remembered that day went as still as statues. Jalal grew worried and so did the two Smith siblings. Don't say that. It didn't happen to him, Wendy whispered desperately. Laxus rubbed his face. You're not saying he's actually in hell? It seemed like hours passed before Natsu stopped shaking, and despite it, Lilith was impressed by the speed of his recovery, if it could be called that considering the Dragon Prince still didn't move nor opened his eyes. The first demons still stood in the circle. None of them had a gender to speak of, Lilith knew, but they still took forms that could be described as female or male. Anksaram was first to step out of it just like always, and he walked to the lying demon with a grace that should not be possible. The supreme demon's resemblance to humans began and ended with the shape of his body. The demon lacked the face to speak of, since his body appeared to be made purely out of shadow swirling underneath the clothes he wore. His head, covered by a heavy hood, appeared to be roughly human, with only two bright white orbs that represented the eyes. A tight battle robe that reached the middle of his thigh was tied together by the wide black belt, and underneath the robe wide pants tucked in heavy combat boots. A gloved hand grasped Natsu's shoulder and his eyes opened wide, his mouth releasing a startled gasp. Gone was the yellow sclera, replaced by black that surrounded the dark red of his irises. "Rise, Soul Eater," Anksaram's voice echoed around the room like it always did, seemingly spoken from everywhere and nowhere, heard directly into your mind and spoken from miles away. A deep shooting baritone that seemed so out of place coming out of the being of darkness. Natsu didn't move immediately, choosing to stare at the odd blackness of the creature before him. With a shaky breath, Natsu pulled his arms beneath him and pulled himself into a sitting position. His wings moved with him, seemingly on their own accord, out of the way to not bother him while he struggled to stand. "No need to hurry," Anksaram assured him. "To be born again to our kind is painful." "I'm a demon," Natsu whispered. His own voice had the same echo it had in his demon form, the same echo Lilith had as well. Morrigan smiled at him and moved to take a step in his direction, but her body disappeared in a flock of ravens before reassembling beside Anksaram. Morrigan was a beautiful demon, looking almost human in comparison to the other supreme. Long black hair reached the small of her back, but the lower half of the silky hair blended into dark thin feathers. A long dress hugged the shapely body closely, and her breasts were tastefully accented by a corset. "You are so much more than just a demon, Soul Eater." Her voice, just like Anksaram's, came from everywhere and nowhere, but it was not as smooth as his, holding raspiness and echo of a bird. She spoke her words with careful precision, but there was no emotion behind it, and her eyes, round and oddly reminiscent of those of a bird but so much more intelligent, betrayed nothing. Natsu looked around, still slightly dazed, trying to make sense of what was spoken around him. His eyes fell on Lilith for a moment, but the demoness only stared back, providing no help to clear his confusion. She couldn't even if she wanted to. "What do you mean?" Natsu finally asked, and one of the nine gave a barking laugh. "You have to give it to that human of yours, Anksaram. He did block his memories quite well." Natsu blinked and turned his head around to look at who spoke. The voice sounded like a harsh whisper, but it wasn't quite like a whisper at all. Anubis stared back, the long muzzle of the canine deity pulled in a sharp, pointed grin that held no humor. Dark gray, almost black, fur covered every inch of the demon. His chest was uncovered, revealing well-muscled but slim-built, while knee-length black shendit covered his legs, fitted to his waist by a golden belt. "He did," Anksaram agreed and looked back at Natsu just as Natsu looked back at him. "You are not just a demon for surprisingly many reasons, Soul Eater. One of them being that you died as a newly born dragon. Have you not died so soon after becoming a dragon, you would not come here at all." Natsu blinked in shock, any trace of fog in his mind gone. A second time someone told him there was a way to avoid eternity in this place had his life gone differently. Flashback **. Upon Armageddon, sinners are released from eternal torture that is hell, while those who sold their souls are condemned to forever serve as jailers and torturers to the gods of underworld. Lilith sighed. "It's the only prophecy people in this place believe in. It is a certainty it will happen in the future, not near future, mind you, but at one point in time everything will end except original beings, and by that extension use. Present time **. Anubis continued before Anksaram could, much to the annoyance of the said god. "I'm sure you noticed there are no dragons here, aside from you, that is as He didn't wait for Natsu to answer before he elaborated. "When a dragon dies, their soul usually leaves their body and forms what mortals naively call stars." Natsu reared back as if struck, turning around to fully face Anubis so quickly his back cracked and the tip of his tail grazed his own leg. "You're saying stars are souls of dragons? Of every dragon that ever lived?" Anubis nodded his jackal-like head without hesitation. "A secret only selective dead learn. I'm sure you feel flattered." Hades rolled his eyes where he stood beside Anubis. By many celebrated as a death god, and also sharing a name with one of the men Natsu truly despised, he was somehow expecting an ugly old man with a long beard and an eye patch. Hades blinked and looked down at Natsu while several Supreme either laughed or stared as well. It was at that moment that Natsu realized he was surrounded by truly omniscient beings and close to omnipotent as anyone could get. Reading his thoughts came to them as naturally as it came breathing to the living. Hades coughed into his hand. The Supreme's skin was a pale white, translucent even. His eyes shone with icy blue fire as did his skin with the power hidden just underneath the skin. His hair was relatively short and blue just like his eyes. Light danced oddly through the strands, making it seem almost like the very hair was on fire. The face that the demon wore looked young, teenage even, and the body was wrapped in shadows completely, shadows resembling a coat. A coat that seemed just as sentient as the rest of the room's occupants did. "I assure you I never had a beard nor an eye patch," Hades informed him in a voice that did not match the youthful face but the old man he imagined. Hades of your life gave himself that name in hopes it would make him seem more terrifying. In my personal opinion, he just disgraced my name, something I personally made sure he was aware of when he arrived. But we are getting sidetracked, my very young demon. I'm sure Lilith informed you of the prophecy. Armageddon it speaks of is the final Ragnarok, the final battle of dragons when their very souls, the stars in the sky, destroy each other out of desperation to rid this world of everything human. Natsu stayed silent but after a moment pulled himself to his feet, refusing to appear weak in front of 9 most powerful beings in Underworld. Anksaram stepped back along with Morrigan in order to leave his personal space and Natsu looked around once more. So if I had lived long enough I would become a star. It sounded ridiculous to his ears. A demon in a female body, with skin as dark gray as Anubis fur and eyes a bright red color, turned to him and nodded. She wore a dark red, almost black tunic over which tightly fitted cuirass of dark black metal stood. Red hair was styled at the top of her head in a mohawk that at the end grew and reached below the small of her back. Minerva spoke, "If you were born a dragon you would become a star no matter when you died." As a mortal who became immortal through magic, it would seem Minerva had an interesting talent to make even the most common words sound like an insult. Your soul did not have enough time to accommodate and thus your body died as a dragon but your soul died as a mortal. It should have been easy to understand, Natsu knew, but it still wasn't. It was hard to believe. He knew there was a reason dragons were considered immortal despite the fact they could be killed. It was of no consolation, however, to know his eternity in hell could have been avoided. Natsu turned around, his lips parted in question when Anksaram appeared in front of him, one glowed hand raising to his forehead and the demon's index finger pressed against the pale skin. Natsu tensed and his eyes rolled back as the demon forcefully opened the doors future rogue left ajar all those weeks ago. He didn't drop to his knees nor did his body shook, he didn't scream but his mouth opened wide at sudden invading to his mind. Lilith watched curiously, standing just as tense in the enormous chamber she entered a week ago. Yes, Zirf did a fine job erasing your memories. I don't understand why. Himmel flinched at the furious voice coming from his High King. Well, he could certainly understand his anger. Himmel's blue eyes moved to the corpse of the Dragon Prince. It was not normal. It was far from normal. He shouldn't look like this. He was a dragon. Why didn't he die like one? Acnologia roared, spreading his wings and folding them in his anguish, and from the sides, Igneel watched both the father and son in open sorrow. Acnologia might hide his emotions behind anger but Igneel had no trouble showing just how much the Dragon Prince meant to him. Himmel bowed his head, his snout almost touching the marble floor of the mausoleum. I can't even begin to express how much grief this brings me and every other dragon on this island, my king. The death of the prince was unexpected and cruel. The gods are cruel to do this to his body. He should have been allowed to. Himmel soon found himself underneath Acnologia as the Dragon King pinned him to the ground so fast he barely had time to gasp in surprise while Igneel tensed, spreading his own wings slightly and lowering his head, ready to leap onto the king in case he took his anger out on the Sky King. Acnologia, Igneel warned but Acnologia paid him no mind. Don't you dare bring gods into this Himmel. The bastards could drop dead on the spot for all I care. This has nothing to do with them, gods don't have power over Dragon Soul and you know it. Himmel swallowed rather loudly, having trouble to reply with Acnologia's paw firmly pressed down on his throat. I'm sorry, Himmel voiced in a strained voice, trying to pry Acnologia off of himself without actually provoking the Dragon King even further. Sorry doesn't change a damn thing. My son is dead and his flesh is still here. Igneel grimaced. looking back at the corpse of the black and red dragon carefully placed on the large stone bed. Had it not been like this for 3 weeks, Igneel would think the dragon was just sleeping. That Natsu would wake up and his red eyes would open. But he knew that wouldn't happen. And truly, the body should be burned, Acnologia knew as much. The smell of rotten flesh was acidic in the air, insulting the body as much as the dragons surrounding it. It pained Igneel to watch as it slowly rotted. It was the first time Igneel actually saw a dragon corpse rotting. Dragons didn't rot. The moment they died, their flesh disappeared from their body along with the soul. This was the clearest proof that Natsu was not a natural, born dragon but a human twisted into the body of a dragon. He died and now rotted like a human he should have been. Acnologia knew that, Himmel knew that, but no one really dared to voice that out loud. After all, if that happened to Natsu, who says it won't happen to Acnologia? And a human cannot be the king of all dragons. Acnologia roared in fury again and stepped off of Himmel, blue eyes turned to the body of his son. Igneel knew the Dragon King blamed himself for the death of his son. He was behind him, he should have watched his back. The dragons on the island were restless, wanting to know what exactly happened, but the kings and queens swore to keep it quiet, and Igneel grew worried because he knew just how reckless Acnologia could get when he was truly angry. How reckless and mad he could get. His agreement with Zirf all those years ago was a very painful example. Acnologia. Igneel tried to talk to the High King. Tried to reason with him, but it seemed Acnologia would not listen today, just like he refused to listen for the past 3 weeks. "Leave me, my king." Himmel spoke, looking worriedly at Acnologia before turning his gaze to Igneel. Igneel respected the Sky King. His skill both as a healer and a fighter were impressive, but sometimes he didn't know when to stop. Igneel could practically feel Acnologia's glare on Himmel even though Acnologia's back were turned to him. "Now," he bellowed so loudly the stained glass of the windows shook. Himmel spread his wings and launched out of the room, a roar of chaos energy following after him. Igneel didn't leave immediately, but he did move towards the doors right after Himmel. "You should calm down, Acnologia. You're not helping anyone like this, Natsu least of all." Acnologia cursed after him loud enough for half of the floating island to hear while Igneel rushed out, knowing it would do no one any good to fight the furious king. He couldn't scream, for it felt like no air was entering his lungs. He was suffocating, yet he was already dead. The finger on his forehead burned with the power of the sun and the all-consuming darkness and unbearable cold of the white moon that stood above the 9th level. A wheezing sound of someone suffocating left Natsu's wide-open mouth, but he still did not collapse, paralyzed by memories of another lifetime. Paralyzed by their implication. Memory asterisk. "Tell us a story, Dad." The voice spoke that belonged to the child Natsu shared his eyes with. A man looked down at him from where he sat on the chair with a warm smile and a head full of light pink hair, a shade Natsu saw only on himself. A man, a human, not Acnologia. Silly how it hadn't crossed his mind to think of his parents from the moment Acnologia took him. But try as he might, he couldn't remember how they looked, so he had no idea if the man he was staring at from the eyes of a 2-year-old was indeed his father. His look certainly seemed to indicate as much. "Which story would you like to hear?" the man asked the child, leaning forward in his chair and setting aside the cup filled with steaming tea. The child put a finger to his chin before a beaming smile lit his face. "The one about the battle at Mount Hakob, you know, the one where you killed the biggest dragon." The man's smile widened as he laughed. "Ah, but I told you of that battle yesterday. Wouldn't you like to hear of some other battle, or of another kind of story entirely? What if your brother wanted to hear of something else?" The child frowned and crossed his tiny hands over his chest. A woman stepped into the kitchen, her ebony hair tied in a loose bun and a cup in her own hand. Could she be his mother perhaps? "Are you filling their heads with another one of your war stories, honey? I told you Natsu's too young to hear about such horrors." Her voice was not unkind, but she did not sound happy. The man laughed again and Natsu couldn't help but compare his voice to his own. "Nonsense. And I make sure to leave out all horrors, right son?" The father looked past the child to another boy, and the 2-year-old turned around to look at the boy his father addressed. The time seemed to stop as Natsu stared at the face of the child that should be his brother. He couldn't be older than 6, but even on the face of a boy so young, it couldn't be mistaken at whose face he was looking at. "Zirf, which story would you like to hear?" The image of a peaceful family afternoon in the warm kitchen lit by the golden rays of summer sun went up in flames as the child Natsu was died screaming for his parents and for his brother to save him. But no one came as the black dragon swallowed it all. Reality Anksaram's hand followed Natsu as the dragon prince collapsed to his knees and he pressed his palm, the eyes on his faceless face narrowing in concentration. The skin under his touch began to burn but he paid that no mind. This was a necessary thing and, really, he did not care for the pain the dead prince felt reliving his death on such violent terms. He was the demon of mind, finding great pleasure in ripping someone's mind apart like he was doing right now. The greatest pain comes by attacking the mind, something Anksaram knew from the beginning, and for a demon that existed since time itself formed the beginning had a special meaning. Natsu jerked under his arm every time he relived the point of time when Zirf tried to resurrect him. The glimpses he gained to the mortal realm from the land of the dead ripping his soul more and more, and Anksaram could feel the amusement bubbling underneath his shadowy existence at the irony. Zirf truly believed at the time he was doing what was right. The skin began to peel under Anksaram's hands and the god of underworld looked at the body curiously as Natsu convulsed once again. Maybe Zirf locked far more than just his memories. How interesting. Truly something to make this utterly boring plane a bit more interesting. Other Supreme watched with interest as well, curiously gazing at the pair. Lilith herself found the event interesting but by no means amusing. It was a rather obvious thing whatever Anksaram was doing was torturing the dragon prince. The burns that appeared under Anksaram's palm spread and Lilith had to stop herself from asking what he was doing. Natsu convulsed one last time and finally he screamed. Anksaram laughed at the scream, removing his hand from Natsu's head and any mark of injury that marred Natsu's face disappeared. Ah, truly he could never be just a demon. Anksaram chuckled again and several Supreme exchanged a knowing look filled with dark amusement that made Lilith shudder. He wasn't a human since he was 2 years old. Don't you find that curious, Lilith? Lilith blinked in shock, eyes turning to look at Natsu who had fallen silent, still kneeling on the floor, steam rising out of his mouth and nose and his now black eyes rolled back hiding any trace of red. Zirf outdid himself with this creation, Anksaram continued. Well, I guess that was why I rewarded him in the first place. So how are we going to do this? Altair inquired, her eyes turning to Mira Jane even though the question seemed to be addressed to everyone present in the library. Mira pursed her lips for a moment and before she could reply Altair continued, adding to her own question in an attempt to clarify what she wanted to be answered. I mean, doesn't necromancy require the body of the dead person you're trying to resurrect? As far as I know, Natsu's body is gods nowhere taken by dragons before we could even properly look at him. Mira shook her head, reaching for one of the books that littered the floor. The heavy tome was as thick as her hand and the faded leather indicated to old age. The she-devil dusted the cover and placed the book on the table next to the box where the once dead rat still ran in circles. Here, this is one of the books ZD sent me. It is possible to resurrect a person without the body. According to the book it is actually a better way of doing it this way because the grip on the soul is better. The edge in her voice made the room's occupants tense and uneasy. But, Laxus' eyes narrowed in suspicion. But to get a better grip on the soul one has to go to, retrieve it. Gray choked on his spit, his eyes ablaze as he looked at Mira Jane. Retrieve it, like, go in freaking hell and grab his soul. That's just. He fell quiet, unable to find words to describe what he felt on the idea though he certainly made himself clear enough. Not to mention we don't even know if he's there in the first place, Lucy continued. He maybe isn't in hell to begin with and even if we somehow actually get there it could all be for nothing. Jalal nodded in agreement. We should try to find out where he is before we decide we're going to raise him from his grave. He could be enjoying himself for all we know. Pain. Unbearable, cold, cutting, excruciating pain. That was the feeling that overwhelmed him as he slowly regained his consciousness. The fabric that covered his legs felt like sandpaper against his skin. It felt like his spine was stretched until it snapped and his head and upper body was pressed against the cold smooth floor by something heavy and wet and if he had to guess that were his wings, hurting and screaming just as loudly as the rest of his body. Anger. That was the second thing his slowly waking mind registered. No, not anger, wrath, as burning and unbearable as the pain. A growl left his black lips, sharp teeth drawing dark ebony liquid from the lips as they pierced the skin. Fury at the pain he felt, maddening anger at his unbeating heart, at his new form, at himself and everything around him what Anksaram did. Black wings in a shower of black energy, burning, pain, under the heavy smoke, fire, burning alive, blasted by the roar, killed, killed by the black-winged beast. Dragon of Apocalypse, Dragon of Death. Death, cold, bright, fragmented, a state between. Alive but not truly, awake, dead, dead to the world. Killed by his father and resurrected by his brother. Cursed to castle hell and underworld by both of them. His father Acnologia, his brother Zirf. Something moved just out of his sight and Natsu leapt, blind by his fury and pain. The sharp, hard bone where his thumb met the wrist connected with someone's chin. The size of his claws didn't allow him to form a fist, but he easily worked around that, catching the face with the claws just as their head snapped back, clawing parts of the skin to ribbons before his other hand grabbed the neck and squeezed as the two hit the ground. Pain, anger. Natsu kneeled on his opponent, clawed feet digging into someone's thighs and his wings spread wide, allowing him to keep his balance even as the slim form tried to free from his hold. His tail whipped through the air when the struggles of his prey doubled and he howled in his pain and fury, ignoring the black blood pooling around the two as blood trailed down the face of his opponent and dripped down from above. Pain, anger. His tail was a wicked thing, an axe-like and connected to the flesh, the tip long and twisted into a spear that was prepared to sink into the body beneath him, tear it apart and... His opponent opened their mouth and a golden snake shot from it, striking him in the nose that burst from the impact and he snarled. Pain, anger, clarity. Natsu blinked, red eyes looking down at Lilith's bloody face. He blinked again, becoming aware of their surroundings, black obsidian columns lined with glowing purple lines and obsidian smooth floors, his position, still on top of her. He jumped back quickly, almost falling down as his body screamed in pain. He hissed, never taking his eyes off of Lilith as golden snakes circled around the two. She gave him a blood-stained grin, any sign of mirth non-existent. She slowly stood up, hand grasping the long gash on her shoulder he didn't remember leaving there. She stayed silent, nodding meaningfully toward him. Hesitantly, Natsu reached for his shoulder, retreating his hand quickly when he felt something sticky and wet. Dark red, almost black greeted him as he looked at his hand. Sleeping Beauty's finally up, I see, Lilith finally spoke. Natsu's head snapped up, glaring at her with such intensity Lilith flinched, likely expecting him to pounce on her again. What is this? He demanded instead, gesturing to the long gash in the same spot and shape like Lilith's. Is this your doing? Lilith released an annoyed breath from her nose. That's all your fault, Soul Eater. Natsu growled in answer. Everything hurt. He was not in the mood for her games. Speak clearly. His eyes seemed to glow in the dark of the eight circle and a cold knot twisted Lilith's stomach as the word choked in her mouth. Until you learn how to control your emotions, until you learn how to fight and hurt without them, any soul you hurt in the underworld you will hurt as well. You hit me, it hurts you as well. How do I stop it? His eyes still glowed and Lilith gasped as her stomach twisted. You can't. You have to stop feeling better, isn't it? Natsu hissed at her, eyes losing their glow, and Lilith took a step back, eyes wide as she looked at him. Natsu's eyes moved to his bloody hand and he tried to concentrate on what he felt. Anger. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. The next part will be out soon.